Sega.
Pengo tells the story of a little red penguin and his struggle against the oppressive snow bees. Does he try to negotiate a peace deal with them perhaps, or does he crush them to death with ice blocks? I think you know the answer to this one. It's worth mentioning that despite Pengo releasing in 1982, it's far from forgotten, as a multiplayer arcade revamp version was released on Ring Edge 2 technology in 2010 as part of Gessen Love plus Pengo, also known as Arcade Love plus Pengo. This version includes multiplayer gameplay in widescreen, but I'm not covering that version as we're looking at the original here. First, I'll be looking at the 1982 arcade original running on Sega Z80 based hardware. For this, I'll be using the MAME emulator. Then I'll be comparing it to the version included in Sega Memorial Selection, a 1998 Japanese-only collection of 3 Sega arcade games. This I'm running on Windows 10. The arcade version debuted in 1982, both in Japan and, later that year, in the USA. It was programmed by Coreland and distributed by Sega. The game opens with a quick introduction to all the main objects you'll see in-game, before the title appears. Next, there's a short cutscene of the penguins and snow bees running on the ice while the northern lights flash overhead. This is then followed by a rolling demo showing you how to play the game. There were 2 key versions of Pengo released. The first draws the maze in, then plays a tune very similar to the commercially released track called Popcorn. A different version of the game drew the maze in instantly and features this somewhat different original tune. It also feels a bit harder, despite the difficulty dip switches being set the same. But we're going to stick with the original version, as that's what the PC port is based on. There are many ways to score points in this game, such as hit snow bees with ice blocks, shake the wall to stun them and then run over them, destroy their hidden eggs, which are hidden in blocks that are briefly highlighted at the start, as well as the ability to score a large number of points by arranging the 3 diamond blocks into a line. I guess penguins like tidy gemstones. If there's only one snow bee left, they can run to the corner of the screen and disappear. I guess this was to prevent a game going on too long. One other amusing event is that in between every 2 levels, a number of penguins dance across the screen to a Beethoven tune, in the style of the cutscenes from Pac-Man. Now it's time for some pure gameplay, where you can see that I'm not really very good at this game. Sega Memorial Selection was a Japanese-only PC release from 1998. It collected 3 classic Sega games, Pengo, Flicky and Fantasy Zone. These pictures are of my own copy that I imported from Japan. At first glance, the version included in Sega Memorial Selection appears to be almost arcade perfect, but as we'll see, appearances can be deceptive. The first issue is that regardless of whether you run it in a window or full screen as shown here, the graphics scale badly, especially the checkerboard border around the play area. Looking closely at the numbers, you can see they've been stretched badly too, making some parts fatter than others. Running in full screen also adds borders above and below the play area, making the game window a bit smaller. Later on I'll do a comparison at the pixel level so that you can see exactly what the differences are. The intro sequence is also a little different, with the characters racing in much faster. In-game, the gameplay feels a touch easier than the arcade's default difficulty setting. But the most unforgivable issue with this port is the sound. It sounds like the developers might have even sampled the arcade original using microphones, as the start of each level music has a noticeable background whistling noise. The music clarity jumps around a bit too, especially when it picks up speed. I'm going to play this port now, and then we'll compare both versions. So let's compare versions. Here's the original arcade version. Now I'll wipe over to the Sega Memorial Selection windowed version, which I've stretched to full screen, as it fills the screen better than the full screen version, which is a bit ironic. You can clearly see the stretched, washed out looking graphics with not quite the right shaped pixels. Going back to the arcade, next we'll compare to the Sega Memorial Selection running full screen, and you can now see the borders top and bottom, making the game area smaller. I'd also like to show how the Aurora intro sequence differs between arcade and PC port. Here's a still of the arcade version. Now I'll wipe over to the Sega Memorial Selection version. You can see differences here. The background doesn't quite match the horizon on the PC, although eyes are incorrectly green in the arcade, but fixed on the PC version. One other barely perceptible difference is on the title screen. The arcade version has the name Pengo outlined with a red border, but this somehow went missing on the version in Sega Memorial Selection, although it did gain a trademark symbol. Once again, you can see how bad the pixels look in this port, compared to the arcade original. It's time to go head to head. We'll look at the introduction sequence, gameplay from level 1, and what happens when you get 3 diamonds in a row. The arcade version is another classic Sega game, although quite a difficult one sometimes, or maybe I'm just not very good at it. The version in Sega Memorial Selection appears arcade perfect at first glance, but looking closer you'll find it's not quite right. It feels a bit like a fan remake in some ways. If you enjoyed this video on Pengo, give it a like, or subscribe to find out when the next video goes live.